Is there any possible word on if Soul Calibur will continue on? I wish it would. I wish there was a future for Soul Calibur, but considering what the producer said as he left Bandai Namco, he was the guy that brought it back. If there is any hope for Soul Calibur in the future, it would actually take a miracle. Soul Calibur 6 was essentially your coup de grace. Like, that was it. That was the goodbye. And it's unfortunate because, like, the game had so little of a budget. The game had so small of a budget that it technically had the smallest roster of any Soul Calibur game. Going all the way back to Soul Calibur 1, had the smallest roster. It's unfortunate, right? But you could see that he was not given a lot of money to make the game. Didn't the game do well? It did do well. That's the thing. It did pretty good, but not remarkably good, right? It did pretty good. It actually sold better than most Soul Calibur games, but probably not good enough considering Okubo left. And this is a super cool dude that genuinely seemed like he had a big passion for Soul Calibur and wanted to bring it back. It seemed like there was an ultimatum where it's like, you're either going to make this work and it's going to sell this much, or you're gone type shit. I don't know. It seemed pretty rough. 2 million isn't good enough. What is Bandai Namco smoking? This is the difference, chat. This is the difference between smaller fighting game devs like Arc System Works and the big boys like the NRS, Capcom, Bandai Namcos, because their consideration of what is a successful game is completely different. You get Guilty Gear Strive celebrating this giant celebration of like 500,000 units sold, and they're like, we sold 500,000 units. This is goddamn amazing. This is the best Guilty Gear has ever sold. And you get Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, that sells twice as much as that game did in the same time frame, and Capcom ditched it after 2 months. The scale of what makes something successful completely boils down to the company's expectations. Yeah, MVCI and Street Fighter Cross Tekken sold about the same. MVCI, I think both of those games sold close to 2 million. I only use those as examples, not just because I like MVCI, but because those games are like the failed Capcom games, right? Those are the Capcom games that essentially feel like, goddamn, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, Street Fighter 5, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, Capcom fucking sucks. This shit sucks and fuck you, right? Like, those are the games that left really bad impressions with a lot of people. Street Fighter 5 changed shit over the years. But Cross Tekken and MVCI are like the perfect examples of like, oh, this was when the company went to shit. They still sold nearly 2 million units. Even with that being the case, even Soul Calibur 6 being considered like not a super well-off game, probably sold over 2 million units. That's a shit ton. In comparison to most of their fighting games, that's a shit ton, dude. SNK would be like flipping their shit. They'd have a giant cake in the middle of their studio, and they would have like, somebody would go into space and be like, congratulations SNK, 2 million units sold on KOF 15. There'd be like banners all over the place at the Super Bowl and shit. KOF 15, 2 million units sold. But it's a different company with different expectations and different budgetary concerns, right? People would be losing their minds if DNF Duel, or I'm sorry, if a game like Guilty Gear Strive sold like 2 million units in the first year. How did Samsho sell? Very well. Samsho sold very well between all the different versions it was on. It sold at least over 1 million units the first time we heard, and I think it was getting closer to 2. So Samsho was one of their best-selling fighting games ever, right? There's a reason SNK is making a lot of fighting games nowadays, because Samsho sold very good. Regardless of the problems it had, it sold very good. And guess what? Here's a shocker to all of you too. Here's a shocker of the thing that was like the electrocution jolt that stunned SNK back into its mortal coil, where they're like, fuck, we're a fighting game company, motherfucker, there we go. And they started like pumping out fighting games like crazy. That game was called KOF 14. A lot of people hate on KOF 14, but that game was the best-selling KOF game of all time when it came out. No individual copy of KOF sold more than KOF 14. A fuckload of people bought it. And by a fuckload, I mean at least like 1 million to 1.5 million units. KOF 14 like literally saved the company, and literally the electrocuted jolt like right to the ass cheeks, like zzz. And then they started making a bunch of fighting games after that. Do I think 15 will surpass that? I absolutely do. I think 15 will surpass it as well. Because almost every single SNK's games, like even SNK Heroines, right? You got to start thinking about like SNK Heroines, even SNK Heroines, like the sort of black sheep weirdo, like what the hell is this sort of thing that SNK did. still sold very well. Still probably made them a lot of money. So in my personal opinion, I think it's all completely setting up for the fact that King of Fighters 15 is about to be the most played SNK game, SNK fighting game, like ever. There's going to be more people playing King of Fighters in the same way, and we're seeing a very similar thing from Guilty Gear Strive. There is going to be more people playing King of Fighters 15 than any individual launch of King of Fighters ever. And that's just by, like, the definition. Like, you would like to think that KOF 13 was that game because that game was amazing, or maybe KOF 2002, but none of the series was ever that popular to the point where it's at now. It's fucking nuts, man, to really think about it, like the perspective of things. To be honest, it'll probably end up going down as the best-selling KOF game, which is great, which is awesome, because in my opinion, it's the best-looking KOF game in 3D ever. Like, it actually looks pretty good now. How long will it last is the real question. That's not a real question. Who gives a shit how long it lasts? Unless you are specifically looking for, like, prize pools for your games, unless you're specifically wanting the pot to be bigger at like a tournament or some shit, if that's your motivation, then why do you give a shit? If the game sells like fucking 2 million copies in the first month and then essentially whittles down to a hardcore player base that's relatively small that keeps playing it from this point forward, like 3 months later, you've just described every fucking fighting game until like a big ass expansion comes out. You just described everything. There are two, this isn't 2001, 2002 anymore, where you specifically have like Tekken 5, Third Strike, CVS 2, Marvel 2, and maybe Smash Brothers Melee. That'll actually have larger communities that'll last a long time. The only reason those communities were around and grew over time is because they had no options, motherfucker. Like, they literally had nothing else. A lot of those games were like done. People just stopped making them. What is the situation now? You have a ton of options. You have a shit ton of options. You have so many games to choose from that run really good online, play really well, and all have a decent amount of people playing. I'd honestly argue, because perspective can be skewed, there's probably way more people playing now any individual fighting game that has had like a relatively large audience at the start than any of those games in like the mid 2000s when SRK was big, when all of those fighting games were huge. So who gives a shit? You're going to be able to find people to play no matter what. I guarantee you, if you are like, oh man, but what? There's nobody playing it though. Oh, you can go find people to play it. They're going to whoop your ass though. And I get it. I get it. It's nice playing people that are around your skill level. I get it, man. That makes a lot of sense. But that's going to be hard for fucking anything. Unless you're playing like Fortnite or Warzone, dude. You know what? I have the solution for you. Unless your fighting game is free to play.